Hello everyone, welcome to Farm FERRY. It's another beautiful day here at Unania Farms, and we'll be sharing with you what it takes to raise 1,000-day-old chicks to point of lay. Now we'll also be sharing with you why it is important for you to raise your birds from day old up until when they begin to lay. And if you stick around to the very end, you'll get to see some key factors that you need to put in place in raising your day-old chicks to point of lay. So some of the factors we'll be considering in raising day-old chicks to point of lay includes temperature control, vaccinations, feed and water, debeaking, light and spacing, and finally biosecurity. Before introducing the day-old chicks to the pen, you must ensure that the temperature is adequate. It is advisable to have around 32 to 35 degrees Celsius when you are introducing your birds, and you maintain that temperature and continue to regulate it as the birds develop. When the birds are first introduced, they are unable to regulate their body metabolism. That is why it is important to have these conditions in place. The temperature must be well regulated to help them to adjust and to grow. So the more they grow, the more they are able to stabilize their body temperature. It takes them from within 12 to 14 days to be able to begin to develop those feathers that helps them to adapt and adjust to the temperature. So at this point, it is important that you introduce perhaps an artificial source of heat just to welcome them. For us here, we use a coal pot just to heat up the place and ensure that it is of adequate temperature. We also have our thermometer that helps to guide us in ensuring that we do not exceed the limits of temperature. Where the temperature is not well regulated, there is poor growth. The birds are not able to process their feeds appropriately, so consumption becomes decreased. And then also there is an increase of their susceptibility to certain diseases. So how do you recognize that the birds are experiencing either extremes of the temperature? Where you see the birds clogging around and coming towards the heat, it shows you that the atmosphere is too cold, and so they need the heat to be increased. Whereas where you see them moving away from the heat source toward the wall, where they get the cool and chill feeling of the wall, then you know that there is need for you to reduce the heat. None of these extremes is good for the birds, so you would have to ensure that you regulate the temperature and you follow a detailed timetable that will help you and also help the birds to grow appropriately. When you introduce the birds, it is important that you administer multivitamins, glucose, just to help them to better adjust, as you may have brought them from a distance. So that helps them to better adjust and begin to feed appropriately. Afterwards, there are a series of vaccinations that the birds will have to go through before they get to the point of lay. You have to administer vaccinations like the Lasota, Boro, Salmonella, the fowl typhoid, Marex, and a host of others. So you would have to ensure that you have your vaccination timetable and you would have to follow it appropriately. Vaccinations are very important, so therefore you would have to understand your environment and those diseases that are prevalent in those environments, just so you would vaccinate and prevent eventual problems in future. People who skip some vaccinations that are important to do end up suffering the losses when the birds begin to lay. So you would see that some of the diseases that you would have avoided by vaccinating, when you skip, you would come and begin to face the consequences when you are supposed to just be harvesting your eggs and making the desired income. It is important that you follow through with your vet doctor and ensure that all the necessary vaccines are administered in due time and ensure that your birds are in perfect health condition. Another very important factor that cannot be compromised in this brooding process and the raising of day-old chicks to point of lay definitely is food, or rather feed and water. Well, just as human beings also, we cannot do without food and water. So also the birds. Yes, are you surprised? They cannot do without feed and water. I'm going to give you statistics from week 1 to week 18. They are to consume somewhere around 5 tons of feed, and then the water about 17,000 liters of water. So just as feed consumption would vary based on the age and size of human beings or animals, so also with the chicks, you have to ensure that you monitor their feed consumption. And as they continue to grow, every week you increase their feed ratio. Now, it's also important to also administer water regularly, because where water is lacking, then even the feed consumption will not go as planned. When the birds are first introduced, they begin with the super starter feed, then you move them to the chick mash, crumble, and then they graduate to the grower feed, and eventually they also begin to take the layer feed. Now, in switching the feed, you have to be careful and do it systematically. It is advisable when changing the feed that you do a mixture for some days or for some time before you transfer them to a new feeding pattern. This is just so as to help them to adjust their system to consuming the new feed that you've introduced. At week 9 to week 12, at those times it is convenient to carry out the debeaking. This is where you trim the beaks of the birds to avoid pecking of each other and then the pecking of eggs in future. It is advisable in stocking your birds that you have at most 9 birds per square meter. This is to allow them the much space they require to exhibit their social behaviors and to also grow properly and to avoid the spread of diseases as the case may be. So when they are well spaced, they have enough room and comfort to grow. Also, they need lights. You must ensure to provide constant light, especially in those early stages from week 1 to week 4, those brooding stages. They need constant light. Now, where you do not provide constant light, then the chances of stampede increases. Last but not the least is biosecurity. Biosecurity is an important factor in raising your day-old chicks to point of lay, not just for this period but throughout your farming activities. Whatsoever you are doing in your farm, you must ensure to put your biosecurity measures in place. Now, it means that for your farm, the entrance, you must have a foot deep to ensure that anybody coming in disinfects before coming in. You must have the coats in place that would be worn by anybody that is coming in to the pen. You would need to have specialized shoes for the pen Also, you must be careful not to allow strangers into the poultry pen where you are raising your birds. This is to avoid any form of contamination. So you would have to restrict entry into the pen. Only those who are responsible for taking care of the birds should be allowed into the pen. So if you are able to put all this together, then we are good. So having said all this, why then is it important for you to raise your day-old chicks by yourself in your farm up until they begin to lay? Now, it saves you of getting substandard birds. That's because some of the vendors you get your point of lay from may not have followed all these procedures we say. That's because they may also be wanting to maximize their profits. However, when you raise your birds by yourself, it allows you the room to ensure that you follow all these factors, and then you would be assured of the outcome of the birds. Now you would know that if you follow all these basic factors that you need, then when the birds begin to produce, you would be able to recover your investment. However, if you have a reliable source that is able to brood the birds until point of lay and would not compromise on these factors, then you can go ahead to get your birds at point of lay. But if you are not certain of your source, then you have to brood and take care of the birds yourself from day old up until their point of lay. These are the factors you need to consider in raising your birds from day-old chicks to point of lay. None of these things we've mentioned is of any less importance. Okay, so this is where we draw the curtains for today's edition of Farm Ferry. Hope you enjoyed every bit of it. Do well to subscribe, like, leave us a comment, and we'll catch you next time. Enjoy. Cheers.